there.
That one is for YouTube, and then we go to Facebook Live.
Yep. There you go.
I should put something here.
I can write it later if you want.
Well, I can put the description of the event.
There we go.
Education page. Right, so that's it, no?
Ready.
Cool.
Oh.
This is gonna start in the
3, 2, 1.
There we go.
Oh, you can already see us. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so it seems that we're already on Facebook Live and we are recording the session. So it's fantastic. We have today with us Philipp Klaus, maybe introducing ourselves a little bit as well.
Yeah, we are Luz and David.
We work at Evolving Education, where our aim is to democratize educational practices that empower learners to take responsibility of their learning. It's one of the most powerful things that we have found in education after traveling a lot and visiting lots of schools, that when we transfer that responsibility from the educator to the learner, there's something magic happens. And then we end up with people that actually can take control of their lives and can know what they want and work towards those objectives. And not only that, but doing that in community and relations with other people that are also exploring their own passions and putting ideas together. And to talk about that today, we invited Philipp to join us because he knows a lot about this. Philipp has been in many different learning spaces, some of them really well known as Summerhill School in the UK, one of the pioneers of democratic or freedom-based education, but also starting his own projects. For instance, right now, a little school in the south of Spain called Alma Forest, where they combine elements of forest school, democratic education, consent-based education, and also experiences on the wild, as he was telling us before we started the call live. So thank you very much, Philipp, for taking the time to speak with us today. And also let's make this part of that celebration of Summerhill, which is turning 100 years old. And Philipp is also part of the committee that is arranging that event. It's going to be a really big event. We know people in the education space from India to Canada, and there's so many people flying to the UK actually to make this possible.
It's going to be really, really
We are
cool.
so jealous not to be able to make it. We were looking really to the flights and all the options, but at the end we cannot make it this year, but we really want to be able to visit it in person at some point. So welcome, Philipp. And maybe start to share with people who you are. If you can tell us a little bit about your path in education, how you started in it, and yeah, how it has developed. Because I think it's a very rich journey.
Yeah, I'm just going to have a quick moment about the festival because you mentioned it. And so if you don't have anything planned yet for the 5th to the 10th of August, do think about coming to the UK. We're celebrating 100, which is now 101 year of Summerhill because of the pandemic. It was postponed in a big field in Suffolk, and it's going to be great. And there's going to be a lot of people from all around the world that love education and want to change things. So if you have time, come by and stop by. Yes, thanks. Thanks for having me. I never wanted to be a teacher. I think that's sort of the beginning of it all. And it just happened to see a volunteering role in a state school while I was at university. And it paid well. So I decided to be a teaching assistant or a volunteer in a school for 6 weeks. I walked in almost in a suit to a nursery of 3- and 4-year-olds on my first day and felt terribly out of place. And after the 6 weeks, I kind of, it seemed like a thing to do. And I ended up working as a teaching assistant for a while. Only initially planned until I sort of graduated and did all the other things I had planned in my life. But then after I finished university, I decided to qualify as a teacher, which I did in the UK. In a state school in an impoverished sort of East London neighborhood, which had its challenges, but was hugely rewarding because I think everybody there saw the value of an education to some extent. And it was wonderful to sort of be able to change things in children's lives and make things exciting for them. But then once I graduated and did my teacher training, I ended up, or I guess I realized during my time working in a school that I wanted to do something slightly different than state education. And I had a long time ago, before I even had anything to do with schools, read an article about Summerhill in a newspaper in Germany, I think it was. And so when looking for placements during my teacher training, I contacted Summerhill and asked them whether I could do a placement. Got a prompt email saying, no, thank you, we don't do placements. Luckily, I'd sent several emails to several people at the school, and 2 days later, I received an email saying like, oh yeah, it sounds like it might be an interesting thing to do. And ended up going to Summerhill for 4 weeks, where all I did really was make a zombie version of Romeo and Juliet with the kids, which was part film, part theater project. And after those 4 weeks, yeah, it was exciting. There was a lot of blood. It was quite a gory thing. And then at the end of that, I guess Summerhill thought that it might be nice for me to work there, and I thought it would be a great place to be. Unfortunately, they didn't have a job for me, so I went looking for other jobs. But then they offered me a position as an English teacher for the teenagers, for the oldest group. I had never taught teenagers, nor I was qualified. I trained with 7-year-olds. So initially I said I didn't want to do it, but then decided to risk it and, taught Richard III instead of, the very hungry caterpillar for my first year of official teaching, which was a challenge in its own, I guess. But that's how I ended up in Summerhill. And then since then, I went from there to New York, where I taught at the United Nations School, then to Goa in India, where I taught at a small, fairly progressive international school there, and I'm now in Spain and sort of developing this Alma Forest school project, which is very exciting. It's become my baby.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's beautiful when you can combine all those different experiences into starting something that at the end that is very unique, because it's not a copy of Summerhill or a copy of the school you went to go, but now taking the bits that really touch you and that you felt that make more sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what was your first shock or impression when you started at Summerhill?
I guess because it's quite a famous place, and I think I saw a documentary before I actually went as well. And you have this idea that it's sort of this paradise, that everybody's you kind of imagine it like a Disney movie where the birds are in the trees singing and the children are, frolicking around. But then you realize that everybody's just human. And it's actually just normal human beings in a space that is organized slightly differently. And, there's the same conflicts, there's the same problems that any other school would face to some extent. They're just solved differently, or they're handled differently. So I think this idea that, people or children growing up free, or children growing up in democratic education being being immediately kinder, or not facing any of the challenges that children would face in different schools, and teachers and adults wasn't the case, which was it made it a lot easier. It didn't feel as challenging to be there because everybody else was just a human being. Mm-hmm. I guess the one thing that was different to other places is that it was brutally honest, in a sense, so that because everybody lived so closely together and spent all day and every day together, wearing a mask of any sort didn't make sense. So everybody really was themselves. And if somebody didn't like something about you or somebody else, they felt confident to say that to the teachers, for one thing, but also to each other. And friendships didn't break because of that. And that was a nice thing. So, being able to tell a good friend that they're being very unpleasant at the moment didn't mean that you were no longer friends. So I think that brutal honesty was quite apparent very quickly when I got there. Mm-hmm. And I guess then that being a Summerhill student is really hard work, because you don't have things decided for you or done for you. The students manage the conflicts between students and teachers. They manage, how half of the school is run through various committees. So it actually is really hard work, which sometimes is nice if you're there as a staff member, because a few things that would be put on you in a normal school, you are simply not responsible for there. Mm-hmm. which is quite interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big change in dynamics.
Yeah, definitely that responsibility, no? Because we sometimes see how at the end we end up, or some people end up like pushing that responsibility to someone else. But once that you take ownership, there is a massive change because you are the one that is responsible, and means that you can change it too. But
no, and the fact.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and the fascinating thing is that I think a lot of the times the responsibility, or we don't give certain responsibilities to young people because we think they cannot cope with them. But actually, the one thing that I did learn from being there is that they can cope with so much more than we actually entrust them with. And it's sort of this idea that, you know, we believe that when they're 18 and they graduate school, they are given responsibility, and then they are suddenly able to deal with it without ever having had any before. But we, you know, there's this imaginary 18 age that suddenly apparently responsibility is a possible thing. But if you don't actually practice how to deal with, you know, or have responsibility given to you, and part of it is failing and messing up, that's an important part as well. But you need to practice it to be able to do it well.
Yeah,
exactly. I completely agree with that statement. It's like you're 18 and you're free now, but what do you do with your freedom? You haven't been those decisions before.
Yeah, and something that adults, we are really bad at is dealing with those disagreements and conflicts that you mentioned before. Like, we are so used to just having a disagreement, something that doesn't fit, no one really understands what's happening, but you just stop talking to that person, just make some space, don't speak to them anymore, things like that. And what you said of being in the same space and having to communicate those disagreements, things that you don't like, because you're going to keep living with that person, that's so necessary, I think, in anything that we do in our lives, whether it's at work, in organizations, or in our personal relationships. You don't break up with all our friends or with your partner every time you have a disagreement. You have to learn how to communicate.
To manage those things, And at the same time, I think it's really important also that living in a community and that responsibility that you develop towards that community. So there is a really nice exchange.
Yeah, because we end up, I mean, we as adults, we are able to do this, having these conversations, but we restrict them to a very selective group of people that, depending on the way you live, if you live in a city, in a flat, isolated from the rest of the world, it might end up being really a handful of people that you put the effort on solving those communication issues. Well, if you have developed the ability to do this on a broader scale, then it's when you can start forming ties and social connections that are broader than just isolated, close families, kind of disconnected in towns and in cities, as we are moving towards that model of society. And I think we need to go back to that community where people really know each other.
Yeah.
No, and I guess one of the really interesting parts about Summerhill is that I guess there's some formal structures within the school that really help you work through conflict and kind of force you to listen a little bit. So there's the ombudsman, which is a selected group of usually older students. So I think you have to be there 2 or 3 years, I think was the cutoff, before you can become an ombudsman. Staff can become ombudsman too if they run for that position. And whenever there's a conflict, usually you would get an ombudsman. If it wasn't too big of a conflict, you know, you'd find them somewhere around the school and you say, hey, can you help me and whoever else solve a problem and talk through things. And the ombudsman had a little bit of power. So if there was a conflict about a room, for example, they could ban people from a room and say, you know, just stay away from this room. Obviously, it's not working out with the two of you, kind of a thing, which was quite nice. But I mean, the biggest conflict resolution mechanism in the school is the school meeting, which is usually twice a week. And different to, I don't know, sort of if you've heard of Sudbury schools, but Sudbury schools have little committees that solve, like they have a judicial committee of, let's say, 6 people that help solve conflict. Whereas at Summerhill, that is done in the whole community. So if somebody has a problem with somebody, they bring that to the school meeting, and then everybody in the meeting, and if the whole school is there, that could be around 80 people, can discuss a conflict. And I think the one thing that's taught me, and it hopefully teaches other people that as well, is that your own idea is not often the best one. So that, you know, I've often walked into a school meeting thinking like, I know how this conflict can be solved, or I know exactly what the solution to this is. And then after, you know, listening to, you know, for 20 minutes to to the students and other staff, then quite often, the 10-year-old has a better solution than I do. And it's quite humbling. It's also work accepting that, going into a meeting and accepting that your way isn't the highway, and that other people might have far better ideas than you yourself have. And I think it makes all the people in the community aware of other people's ideas, and to value other people's ideas, and to be able to listen to them as well. I think it's an important training in a way of listening to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And well, fun fact, Luz and I now live in the Mexican countryside, and we actually live in a community that has some of those elements of kind of conflict resolution, or a community board that is just people from the village that have been randomly picked and that they change every year. So we had a disagreement with someone from the town, a carpenter that we paid for a work that was never done. And without any paperwork in between, just trusting that things were going to happen. But in this case, most cases, everything happened, actually, working this way. But in this specific case, it didn't. And I went to speak with them. And next Saturday, I have one of those committees where we're going to be sitting down with the people in the village, which is it's a few hundred people. So everyone knows each other or is family of each other. We are really the stranger ones that moved here. So I'm really curious what's going to happen. I kind of accepted already that we had lost that money. Kind of put it on building the house, like an extra expense that I didn't account for. So I'm really up for anything that can come out of that dialogue, because there's no police, there's no government involved. It's just the people from the town having that conversation. Yeah.
It's self-organized. So let's see how it goes.
I was going to say good luck.
Yeah.
Then either you get the carpentry work done or the money back. But
that'll be amazing. Yeah.
Let's see. And could you tell us a bit more about the power relationships at the school and how it affects human development and learning?
Yeah, I think the power relationships for an adult coming in involve a lot of unlearning, in a sense that coming from a state school where I was before, and I actually sort of did my dissertation for my undergraduate about power relationships in the state school that I was at, and interviewed children there. And, they pointed out very simple things like, we're not allowed to have soft drinks, yet the teacher sits, at the desk with their Coke and drinks the Coke during lunchtime, and those things are very, very obvious to students and to children and young people when there is sort of an unfair situation happening. And at Summerhill, it's not perfect. Summerhill still exists in a world where as soon as you step outside of that world, the power relations are very, very different between adults and students, for example. But it tries very hard to maintain a different environment within the school. Now, as an adult, you can't tell anybody to do anything, really. You can tell them, I don't like what you're doing, or please stop doing that, but there is no obligation, in a sense, that the adult has the power to tell a student to stop doing something or to do something. If ever I would want a student to do something or to stop doing something, I would have to bring them up in the meeting, and it would have to be a decision by the meeting. And that is sometimes, it's difficult, because as a teacher or as an adult, generally, you see somebody doing something annoying, or they're going to break something, or whatever it might be. Your reflex is to step in and say, stop doing that. But it's almost sort of avoiding that reflex of immediately knowing what the situation should be. And it takes years. I think it took me probably 2-3 years to sort of fully understand that in a way. And also to not be offended as an adult if somebody doesn't follow your suggestion or request. Because especially the kids who've been there, for a while, they're like, why are you talking to me? Like, you're nothing more or less than my peer in this situation. And that's as I have to treat you with respect as I do other human beings, but I don't have to do what you ask me. And you notice that in new students as well. New students coming in, they still very much look for adult authority. So new students coming in will go to the adult if there's a conflict and be like, oh, so-and-so did this and that. Then I have one of my favorite things always was to just be like, oh, get an ombudsman. and walk away, because it's not, I'm not going, this is not my job, kind of a thing. Of course, if you see, people beating each other up, or this hasn't happened, but in that case, you would step in and try to solve that, but you expect an older student to do the same. I think that's quite a sort of, I guess, an unlearning thing as you move in. And then there's the sometimes difficult task of letting yourself go in the community, in the sense that the community has a lot of power over the individual. And for example, myself as a staff member living there, that all the decisions the meeting makes affect me directly, and I have to also follow those decisions. So I can't, as an adult, say I stand above that, or I can still go and do whatever I want. But if the bedtimes change, if the lessons are decided, the lesson times change, or all of that, that affects me, and I have to accept that I'm a little bit at the mercy of the meeting to some extent. So it's sort of a letting go of sort of this arrogance of me being, and as an adult, better or standing above the students, but realizing that you really are part of it, and you have to follow all the same rules exactly as they are. If I walk in with a stick and stand in the dinner line holding a stick, then I get told off and get chucked to the back of the line as much as any student would. And I think that's an interesting thing to often realize and get your head around, and sort of fully accept and not be resentful for that, but to kind of I guess give a little bit of your independence, in a sense, almost, it feels like, and hand that over to the community and trust the community to make good decisions as well. And I think then in terms of
Yeah, like everybody goes to that meeting, the school meeting, it's compulsory then, or not?
It's voluntary.
No, it's not compulsory. Most people, it depends on the weather, to be honest. In the winter, they're quite full. I'd say usually around 70% of the community will be at the meetings. There's one or two compulsory ones throughout the year, but those are the ones that have a fire drill attached to them, because everybody needs to be part of the fire drill. Sometimes in the summer meetings, if the weather is really nice and everybody just wants to be outside and sort of play in the forest, then it drops down sometimes to 50 or even below that. But there's so much going on. And the one thing I've noticed, compared to other democratic schools or schools that have school meetings that are day schools, because Summerhill is a boarding school and everybody lives there, the entire life is managed through that meeting. And the meetings don't really discuss things to do with lessons or academics, or sort of the education aspect of the school doesn't come into meetings. The meetings are about somebody breaking the bedtime laws and waking people up, or changing the pool opening times, or buying a new trampoline for the school. Those are the things that are discussed in the meetings, rather than really anything to do with education, hardly ever.
Yeah. And as I heard you, there was something inside of me that was telling me, oh, but if everyone is the same, then the kids are going to take control, and then it's not going to be in a school anymore, and it's just going to be chaos and just games every single day, and they won't go to bed until it's 3 a.m. How did you experience that? Is that a real fear to consider or not?
No, not really. So when I first started, actually, I came in, grand ideas about Summerhill, and I everybody was going to lessons and kind of doing their thing. And I was like, oh, okay, this is not exactly what I sort of expected from the school. So I actually, in my first term there, proposed a law drop, which means that all the school rules are dropped. So to explain the laws, I guess there's a law book that all the laws that the meeting makes are in that. There's over 200, it's quite a big book. And they're all, so anything that is within UK law, so the law of the country, and anything that's not a health and safety law. For example, you can't go swimming in the dark. That can't be changed by the community. That's simply a health and safety law. But all the other laws can be changed and dropped as well. And I proposed a law drop, which turned into a week-long series of meetings and discussions about it. And in the end, the community voted against it. So they didn't want to drop all the laws. I think I came in as an arrogant newbie as well, a little bit, which wasn't welcome by all that I would propose that rather than the children. But it led to very interesting discussions. But in the past, those have happened. Drops have happened, and usually within a week or two, most things are reinstated. Because as all human beings, people like some sort of regular schedule, and they want to, knowing something and knowing how something works is a feeling of safety as well. And especially for the younger students, knowing when their bedtime is, knowing where they can be and cannot be, and all those things are very comforting, especially in a big place with 80 people running around. It helps everybody, really. Not least if, when the bedtimes are dropped, everybody's just tired for a long time. The same, there are screening laws that regulate when you can game and use social media and all those things. And they're constantly changing, and the times change, and sometimes they're dropped and various things. But people realize how they affect the community and how the community is run. And then people realize that actually some of those things are quite useful to have. That said, once we had a first aid training, and most of the staff were in the first aid training, and a few students called an emergency meeting. And in that emergency meeting that no staff were present in, and hardly any students, I think it was maybe 20 students or so, they very quickly dropped all the bedtime laws. They just literally had a bit of fun, which was, and then we had until the next meeting, there was no bedtimes, and they realized that having no bedtimes means that they need to organize rota of people who are responsible and awake, which they didn't quite calculate into the equation of dropping all the bedtime laws. But yeah, it happens. It's not an experiment, but kids experiment with the system, which is important.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And something that probably for people that are thinking about how to start experimenting with these ideas of democratic horizontal education and relationships is that when you went to Summerhill, there was already a structure. Kind of kids were used to it, were used to the laws, the way the parliament works and everything else. But how did it go after you left Summerhill and you went to other schools that maybe weren't functioning in a similar way? What did you take with you? What could you implement in those other learning spaces?
So yeah, Summerhill is very fortunate that it's an existing place with lots of people who've been there a long time and lots of long-term students, which are sort of the culture keepers, and they sort of keep that kind of culture alive. Before I say what I've taken away, I visited other schools that are fairly new and we're trying to implement democratic meetings, and they often struggled because it's a difficult process. It's not easy. And we even had some Summerhill students leave, and I visited them in another school in Germany that, and they're like, oh my God, the meetings are terrible. Like they don't know how to do, the students, and suddenly you had a 9-year-old running the meetings at the school in Germany because, she just knew how they should be, kind of a thing. It was, so it's quite interesting to see how difficult it is to set those up. There's actually a documentary that a friend of mine made about the first year of a school, a democratic school in the US, called Approaching the Elephant. And it's interesting to see how the kids at that school grow into that system of the meetings and the formality, because they're actually really formal things in terms of the voting and the taking turns, and it's a very formal affair. So that's an interesting watch. The first job I had after Summerhill was in the US at the UN school. And of course I was like, it works so well at Summerhill, it must work here. So of course I started it was a class meeting. I didn't do it as a school, just with my class. And then I tried to give them as much as I could the power to decide things within the classroom potentially, or they could bring things to the meeting and vote on them. And of course it turned into utter chaos. And I had to realize that for children who weren't in a system like that or had never experienced it, it's a huge leap to suddenly go and say, here's a meeting, decide. And I think I should have put much more of a process in place to enable them, to train them in a sense to use that mechanism. So it didn't work out as well as I'd hoped. But I think the main thing to take away from Summerhill, and it's something that can be applied anywhere, is not so much the structure or the democratic meetings, it's very much an attitude towards children, which is something that I've been able to sort of apply wherever I worked since, or even during camps, or be it at the playground in New York where I helped set up at some point. And it's sort of being what Neil said, on the side of the child, is very much that idea that you engage with them at eye level, which I guess for me is a little bit easier simply because I went through the Summerhill sort of, or I stayed at Summerhill for quite some time. And to see young people as full human beings, not as something on the way, not as a becoming a soon-to-be adult, not as a vessel to be filled, not as this vulnerable thing that only needs protection, or that needs to be taught everything, but as a full human being, who has a rich emotional life, who has valuable ideas, and who often doesn't necessarily have the skills to articulate all of that, but given a bit of support and a chance and time, they will be able to do that. And I think that's quite an important thing to take away. And no matter, you can, if you go to, work in a state school, it kind of means, if there's somebody complaining about something the class has to do, you can literally sit down and be like, hey, I hate this too. This is outside of my power to change, but how can we make this a better situation for all of us? And that's just an honesty that I think children value, and it goes a long way. It makes their life or the students' lives much more comfortable. As an adult, or as a teacher, it's probably a bit more work because boundaries sometimes become a bit blurry. And that can be a lot of emotional work. Because children will then, potentially demand more and be emotionally more involved as well. But I think that's the one takeaway, is an attitude towards childhood or young people, not necessarily a structural thing that you need to sort of copy and recreate somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can see how children can empathize with that and see that you're on their side, so they can talk with you about challenges, and instead of being against you, because it feels like when you are in that hierarchical structure where there's power, you're really either just obeying, being a good follower, or rebelling and trying to yourself. No? And we don't really want people to develop in either of those directions. We want people that are able to communicate and look for the things that they want to achieve, but on a constructive way and respectful way with everyone else. Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it's a essential human need to be in control of your life. Like that autonomy is super important to be fully human beings.
No, I mean, there's small steps that anybody in any classroom can take, and it's sort of I don't know if you know, Arrow Education has a wonderful list somewhere on their website about sort of children's rights in school. And it's not having to ask to go to the bathroom, but simply being able to declare, I'm going to the bathroom. Not having to ask to get a drink of water, but just being able to go and do that. The idea of physical movement when needed for a child, for a young person, is very important. The idea of not being compared to other children, not being like, oh, look how, look, Johnny did this. Why didn't you do this, kind of a thing, I think is very important. And, young people and students they do actually like knowing how well they're doing sometimes, but it shouldn't be a comparison to somebody else. It should be a comparison maybe to an abstract thing or to their own progress, and see how they progress rather than comparing them to their peers. Yeah. So there's a few things that are, quite easy to sort of implement in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really like it.
Yeah, we'll share the link about the Aero list of
the children, right? Yeah. And how different are the classes or the lectures in a democratic school from a regular school? Just for people to know more or less.
Yeah,
I guess it changes from school to school. So there is there's like the Sudbury model, I guess, which there are no offerings. They wouldn't put a timetable up, but the children have to go to one of the adults in the community and be like, hey, can you teach me some maths, for example? Okay. And then they find a time and space to do so. And it might be students getting together and saying, hey, we're all 16. We all want to, go off and do this exam. We need to find somebody to help us. At Summerhill, it's slightly different. So there is a timetable. And at the beginning of each term, students sign up to the lessons that they want to be able to go to. So they don't have to go to any of them, but it just means that the timetable is then made around what they sign up for, so that they have the ability to go to all those, and those lessons then don't happen at the same time. So there is that timetable that is made, and I was surprised how straightforward the lessons are really at Summerhill, compared to working even just in a state school beforehand, where you try to do lots of exciting things and make things fun and different in a sense. At Summerhill, once the kids want to go to a lesson, they just want to learn whatever they have signed up for. So if they go to to an English lesson, and then 90% of the time you're not actually teaching them anything that they perceive to be English, then they get quite annoyed. So it's you get a lot more done in lessons in Summerhill than you would elsewhere, I think. But they're also much more focused on academics than they are on sort of, I guess, sugarcoating the pill, because in a normal school, everybody has to be in the lesson. So you try to make it appealing to all those people who also really don't want to be there. Whereas at Summerhill, everybody who's in a lesson wants to be there. So you don't need to, get the fireworks out. You just need to teach what they want to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a big insight. Yeah. And it's the same that happened with us, right? As adults, when we want to learn something different, whether, for instance, we had to learn how to do a website. We weren't looking for gamifying the experience or anything. We just wanted to do a website on WordPress, look for blogs and online trainings that just said how to do A, B, C, and follow the steps, and that's it, because we wanted to learn. No one had to keep us entertained about it. So it's the same with kids, I guess. But yeah, it's that choice that doesn't exist in most schools, what makes it difficult, because when you have half the class that really doesn't want to be there, then...
And once that you lose the power of choice, you're just a follower and just receiving that information. You become kind of a consumer of that information, but at the same time, you don't even want to, you're not even interested. No, so you are there, your body is there, but your soul is not. So it gets pointless. But once that you take that decision.
No, and then ultimately, all it ends up being is this terrible term, behavior management. Because all you're doing is trying to manage the behavior that, some kids who might be interested can actually take on a few of the things that are being taught, but the rest you could just want to keep in their seats and hopefully quiet so that it doesn't, go terribly wrong. And that's, unfortunately, a lot of education, I think, has evolved to being more behavior management than actual education. Certainly, looking at my teacher training, there was a lot of behavior management in there, which is almost, I guess it's necessary, but it's very sad to sort of have that as one of the main points of your teacher training, is to manage behavior rather than to teach, which is a thing. But
yeah, I guess that when you can also focus as a teacher on the learning process itself, not just on managing the people and the class, then you can be a lot more creative about the activities. You can enjoy more yourself, the teaching.
And if you're
the best example are teachers who, in theory, have high expectations of their students, but then when you go to a teacher training session, as all schools do regularly, it's terrible. The behavior of teachers being, taught something in a room is horrible. Everybody sits in the back of the room. Everybody's constantly talking. Nobody's actually listening to the poor person who was brought in to teach these teachers anything. So, it's, if a group of teachers who in theory are there to implement this in a classroom can't do it, what hope do we have that the students will? So
I really empathize with that, because we have done that too many times, and also as an offering. So we have been mostly in public schools where we went like, can we share something that we have learned about education? And we came with our documentary film, like a short version, 15 minutes, do a dialogue. And then, as I said, everyone on the back of the room, not engaged at all. Then when we throw them some questions to discuss in groups, they didn't make the groups, they didn't discuss the questions that we asked them to discuss, really nothing. Well, there were some people, as you said, some people that were engaged, but most of the time it ended up being for us behavior management as well. It was like, what is this? Why are we doing this? So we stopped doing that. It's like, okay, we're only gonna do this if it is requested. Because
If they want to do it, I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's so simple. It's really common sense, but at the same time, not really commonly applied.
Yeah, no, I mean that's one reason. For example, at the school I am now, we don't have any external rewards or sanctions for any learning in education. You know, there isn't those ticks on the board that, you know, somebody's doing well or sitting still or all those things, because we feel it's quite important that people are intrinsically motivated to want to learn, and that might sometimes take longer because, you know, for a 7-year-old learning, I don't know, their phonics or whatever it might be, they don't really necessarily see a whole lot of use to that at that point in their life. So sometimes that's why schools resort to stickers and points and, you know, whatever, the class dojos and stuff like that. But actually giving them a bit more time to come to the realization that it's useful is in the long term much more important, really.
Yeah. And a question that comes related with this is that when, as a kid, you are there and you can decide not to go ahead with a piece of learning because you find it hard. So here we're talking about self-controls and perseverance, which we think that are key skills to develop as human beings and that we need to have in our lives, in many aspects of our lives. But then there's that fear of, okay, if we're in a learning environment where I can decide what I want to do, then when things get complicated or I need to put an extra effort to learn something, I may give up. I may simply say, oh, that's not my thing, or I'm not good at math, or I'm not good learning languages, or whatever it is. Even though I might know that that's something positive for me in the long run, I might not do it at that point in time. And also we might think that children might not know as well what it's important for them in the long term, and might give up more easily to go to play or something like this. So I know this is a very complicated question, but probably one that many people have in mind. How do we support the development of that self-control and perseverance when kids can say, I'm just not gonna do that?
Yes, I think it goes back to the last thing I said, I think, about time. For one, they need time to abandon lots of things. And I've seen, not so much in terms of academic subjects, really. It's more, you know, the projects they do, their own things that they start, really. And it's important that they can abandon those. It's also important for us adults to realize that learning doesn't just happen if something is completed. You know, sometimes the child realizes halfway through a project, like, I have gotten out of this what I want. I have learned exactly what I wanted to learn. I don't need to do the next 10 things that I thought I wanted to do because I've gotten everything I want out of it. I don't think children or young people, neither do adults, really give up on things after trying things once or doing, you know, people have negative experiences in a math lesson, for example, doesn't keep them from doing math forever. But what's also important that, I mean, when I first started at Summerhill, I was teaching English, and I had, you know, 13, 14-year-olds who'd more or less never been to lessons and were probably writing at the level of a 7 and 8-year-old. So I was scared because I had to prepare them for when they were, you know, leaving, in a sense. But I realized very quickly that we really rush children through education early on in an unnecessary way. And it's partially down to the education system that we know, you know, 30 kids in a room, you have to, you know, teach everything 15 times. And hopefully after the 6th year of them being taught something, they'll remember it. Because half the time they'll be distracted or interested in other things or just not ready or absent or whatnot. But if you have, you know, in a smaller school setting, or for example at Summerhill, where, you know, the kids just don't go to lessons for the first 4 years, and then they're like, oh, I see my older friends going off to college and doing X, Y, and Z, or, I'm motivated because I want to play these computer games and I have to do a lot of chat typing with the other people in the game, for example. And then suddenly because they now have a reason for wanting to, get better at reading and writing, and they go in and they pick it up extremely quickly because suddenly they are there and want to do something. And even if they struggled with reading and writing in the past and disengaged with it, for example, suddenly it's meaningful. And, the children I just mentioned, 2 years later, they passed their GCSE exams and went off to college because for those 2 years, they went to every lesson they went, they picked up all the stuff, they soaked up everything that they could because they were motivated and ready, rather than, sort of sitting for years and years and years in lessons where nothing really sinks in because they're there for the wrong reasons, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the sort of alternative education systems also have, it's almost like a contract a little bit. So to give you an example, recently in my school, we have independent projects where the children choose what they do with their time. And some kids wanted to build a go-kart. And that was it's a fair financial investment from the school in terms of buying the materials, and it was going to be electric go-karts. We had to buy the motor and various things. And it kind of came with the expectation that if we're going to put out these 400 euros in materials, you kind of have to stick with it. You can't, just then after 2 days say, oh, who cares? So it's a little bit, it's kind of like a contract. You kind of enter contracts with students as well. Or at Summerhill, the other example is they had external teachers coming in for be it chess or music or various other things or languages. And if you signed up for an external teacher that came in to the school, it was pretty much that you had to go to that lesson because a human being was coming to the school, traveling and taking it upon itself to teach you, and you had agreed the time slots. So then you need to also go.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that aspect as well, that you kind of, and that, those are sort of more formal contract things, but that happens a lot as informal sort of human relation contracts, in a sense that if you ask somebody to help you with something, you don't, quit straight away because you see that somebody else is putting in an effort and you value the other person's effort. But in the long run, I've never seen it as a problem in terms of perseverance, or that there is a continued lack of perseverance, throughout a child's history or time in a school where they get to choose.
Yeah, that might happen. Like I was thinking about your question, and I guess that when we kind of put too much pressure on the mistakes, when we are scared to make mistakes, that prevents us from trying things and keep going. However, if mistakes are normal and are part of the learning process, then there is not such a big deal with, oh no, I have made a mistake, so I'm not gonna do it anymore. So I think that maybe demystifying those mistakes and errors is what keeps living that perseverance to start flourishing per se. Like people, if you're not scared, you're not gonna stop because you fail once.
Yeah, because there's not an expectation of what you need to do or what you need to know by a certain age, which is something you said that is very true. That along primary school is kind of the same content again and again and again and again. And as kids, I think we just forget from 1 year to the next one, and then we retake it and retake it and retake it because we're not really engaged or anything. But if we had kind of, okay, this is the content that you need to get, I don't know, certificate of primary education, whatever it is. Now you have as much time as you want. You're gonna take those classes whenever you're ready, whenever you're engaged. Maybe it will take approximately the same amount of time, but they will really be focused on something, whether it's math or learning languages or whatever it is, more really into it.
I mean, maybe you just learn it. Because just repeating the same thing every year is not actually, I mean, there's not retention there. It's just memorizing and vomiting, but not, it's nothing, it's being internalized.
I guess that we have there two things. Now, one of them is learning per se, whether it's happening or not. That I agree with that, that if you are not engaged, like for instance, I got the highest marks in high school in history. And I know absolutely nothing about history of my home country of Spain, which was the history I was learning. And I got, 10 out of 10 in every exam because I was just a memorizing machine, vomited that in the exam, and then I completely forgot. Right now, I know more about history of China because after traveling, I got really excited about that culture. It was completely different to mine, and I started reading books, and I seriously know nothing about the history of my country, which I feel like a big lack that now I'm starting to start reading about it. So if we think about meaningful learning, something that we really learn, it's the exams or the fact that you're passing one year after another, that doesn't mean anything. And then if we think about the exams and the certifications per se, it will be way more, it sounds to me, it will be healthier to have that kind of set of standards that are out of our control, that is the government or the Ministry of Education, whoever sets those standards, to have them clear there. And then in the learning center to say, okay, if you want to get a certificate of primary education or secondary education or whichever level it is, these are the requirements. Now explore how to get there, no? Because it's true that many kids are going to want to have those certificates to maybe go to college or to do other things in their lives. But it's different when you can decide when you're ready and excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the difficulty is, and it's we've faced that, for example, in the school in Goa, and a little bit here as well, is there's a lot of schools who do that actually, who give a lot of freedom in terms of how things are taught and when things are taught. The difficulty is when students change schools. And when then suddenly they would move out of a school that's more alternative, where they have the choice what to do and when to do it, but then they go into a more mainstream school where suddenly they're expected to know X, Y, and Z, which an 8-year-old child has to know apparently, then it can be a negative experience for the children because they feel like their learning hasn't been sufficient, or they're behind, for example. So that's the real tricky bit, that once you're in an alternative environment, the transition can be tricky, and that's sort of managing that. And at the school I am now, we're trying to manage that in a way that we provide an alternative environment, but one that children can still drop in and out of, if their families move, for example. So that's a bit of a tricky one. And back to the exam things, I don't think exams are really part of education. I think they're a practical hurdle, where, to get admitted to something, but I think they're not really, they don't really, yes, like you said, they're not meaningful learning. They don't really teach you anything. It's just something that you have to do potentially. Just like filling out your tax return is a practical hurdle in life, but it's not really a meaningful thing.
Yeah.
And along the conversation, it was very evident in what we talk about. There's a long process of personal development to become and to be a facilitator that can really support children in a self-directed way, where they are taking control, ownership of the learning process. So I would like to invite you to reflect a bit more, or tell us the things that have helped you to develop personally, to be able to be in that space and really be the horizontal and listening, as you have mentioned, and accepting all these things. Because from traditional education to reach that point, and I know many educators that are tired of the schooling system that they are obliged to follow, and they want to transition towards an education that's more aligned with their values. So it probably will help them to know what's the personal path that you have to go in along the process, or what could help them.
I guess to some extent, ultimately, you have to ask yourself the question, do you really enjoy spending time with young people and children? Because if you see yourself as an educator and your identity is a teacher identity, and I'm in this job because I'm the best teacher, and it's all about being a teacher, then I think it's very difficult to change that. So it's almost the ultimate test is go, I don't know, work in a summer camp. And if you still like children after that, then you might be able to sort of change things in your classroom, because it's sort of part of the being on the side of the child is very much putting their needs first to some extent, and that means making decisions that might not make you look like a brilliant teacher, but it could be having a class that is more unruly, that is louder, it could be a class, it could be having that one class in the school that everybody hates because they never listen. But that's because they've learned to value respect over a teacher that shouts at them and tells them to do something. So I think that's sort of there's a risk to be taken, and it'll always lead to confrontation with colleagues and management ultimately, because the goals are different often, and not least kids will probably like you better if your class is run differently. So there's a bit of that as well, of the idea that if you make life in the classroom interesting for your children, people perceive that as pandering to the children rather than the hard work it actually is to make that happen. So I think the listening aspect is an important one. Making learning fun is important, but that works if you're having fun yourself. So you have to admit to your own humanity in the classroom, and that is equally for the good days and the bad days. And if you can have fun doing what you're doing, then your students will have fun. And fun doesn't mean I've taught a brilliant lesson, but if you're walking around the classroom laughing and having a joke, and it's almost like being one of the kids in the classroom, then it's a positive thing. It's not easy, and it goes terribly wrong all the time because there's a tipping point into chaos, and you're sort of riding the wave of that tipping point. And sometimes you fall off the other side and everything really goes to hell. But I think risking that and being able to take that risk and letting go of control, I guess that's the one, that you're handing over control to your students. And that's not going to be easy, and trusting your students as well, because they need to learn that as well. You've probably never been given the chance to be in control of any aspect of their classroom. And it could be putting the furniture a different way in the classroom. It's very little things. You don't have to hand over the entire classroom to your students. It could just be little aspects of school, but they'll probably get it wrong a few times as well. And it's sort of allowing that to happen, allowing those mistakes to happen, rather than as a teacher clinging on to that control to prevent any sort of chaos or anything from going wrong. So that's sort of letting go is a big one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that transition from control to trust. And I was writing also that active listening, that it mainly focus on the relationship, on working and having an amazing relationship with the learners. And also the part of having fun and being passionate about what you do. And once that you are passionate and you are enjoying, that is a spread, and it's just like a flame. Everything, if you are shining, then other people are gonna be contagious. They are gonna start feeling that, and that passion is gonna also flourish in them. So I think that those three elements, they are really cool. Like relationship, trust, and fun.
And trust in the process, I guess, as well.
Yeah, a friend of mine. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, a friend of mine runs something called a flying squad, which is basically an alternative school thing outside of school. They're never in a building. They always sort of travel the city. But he calls it a prankster attitude towards learning and teaching. To not take yourself seriously and be able to play pranks on yourself and other people. And it's getting the kids involved in literally playing pranks within the school is quite fun, be it hiding messages or whatever it is, you can have a lot of fun. And that's sort of the important part, and being a bit of a rebel and breaking the rules, I think is important. I'll never forget, while I was still a teaching assistant, we used to it was the year 3s, they were the 8-year-olds, and they studied Egypt every year, and they went to the British Museum to look at the Egyptian exhibit every year, and it was really boring. It just isn't much fun. So there was a lucky group of kids that I was taking around, and we literally walked in with our clipboards, put them in our backpacks, and then toured the entire museum and looked for everything we could touch. There was always things on display and activities going on, and we didn't fill out any worksheet about Egypt, which I feel sorry for the other kids who had to do it, but we learned about 3-legged frogs and luck and what a fake pound coin looks like. And I think that's sort of the being able to not do what you're supposed to do, but what you feel is the right thing for the kids is important. So taking that personal risk as an educator to not follow the rules.
Mm-hmm. And I think that every time there's more people creating the spaces and allowing the spaces for this trust to develop, because every time there's more people aware that on one hand, the skills that you develop in that environment as a kid are incredibly important for life, particularly in the moment that we're living right now, where there's every time less jobs that are based on just being an obedient, repetitive worker. And on the other hand, that real meaningful learning does happen better when you are responsible and take ownership for your learning. So it's not that, because when we talk about these different ways of learning, it sounds as if, oh, but they're just having fun or they're just developing socio-emotional skills. No, they're really learning lots of maths and languages and engineering. So the kids are going to be in your school building a go-kart. I mean, they're going to have to learn tons of different skills and probably using 3D designs and tons of things that many kids wouldn't learn even some of them until they're at university level, and maybe they learn it before they're 10, which we have found in many learning environments, for instance, in programming and robotics, where some of those kids, when then they go to university, they're like, how is it people are learning this now? I learned this a long time ago. So I'm gonna do a specialization on the side because I already know this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the most common comments from ex-Summerhill students who, at the age of 16 or 17, went to college in the UK, and all they all complained about their classmates and their peers in these colleges being so immature, and they're like, they're not there to learn. Like I chose this course because this is what I want to learn, but all these other people are just sitting around, goofing around, and they're so immature. So that's an interesting comment. I think learners that are in control of their environment certainly are much more mature and articulate human beings than people who go through a standard school or traditional school trajectory.
Yeah, and talking with those learners is one of the key things that have motivated us to take this path ourselves, to work on communicating, democratizing, bringing awareness about the impact of these educational practices.
Yeah, it blew my mind. I was like, wow, this 12-year-old is clearly more mature than me. Oh my God. But it was like that because they are working on that every day, and they are doing that. They are taking control of their decisions, which it seems easy, but when you follow orders for 18 years, it gets tough. So yeah,
maybe one quote to finish our session was, we visited Hadera School near Tel Aviv in Israel, which is also a democratic school, the first one in Israel. And we were talking with some of the kids,
with that guy.
and we asked a 12-year-old girl, okay, this sounds very cool over here, and you seem very happy, but in the real world, outside the school, people are not so respectful with kids. There's not that many horizontal relationships. How are you gonna deal with that? And she paused and thought about it, which just that element itself was already like shocking that she took the time to think about it. And she said, well, maybe then my role is to bring this respect outside these walls. I was like, okay.
It was amazing.
Yeah, so that's the kind of that we want to hand this world over to.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's it's a really difficult thing to have people understand, because unless they spend time in these schools or with people who've been in the schools or worked in the schools, it's really hard to get their head around what it is like. I mean, even the school I am in now, we're not very radical. We are, a hybrid of very different things. But people just don't have an idea what it is, because it's almost like people have this idea in their head that there's traditional school and then there's anarchy. Either you're in a traditional school or and not the good anarchy. I believe in anarchy, the political system, but anarchy as rioting in the streets, anarchy. And people don't seem to believe that there's gray zones in between, so it's very difficult. I guess that's the mission that we have as educators from different alternative and progressive environments to make people aware of these and that they exist and that they're a real choice. And that sending your child to a school, to a progressive school, doesn't mean they're never going to be able to learn to read and write, and they're going to live under a bridge for the rest of their life, but that they actually, that it's an equal, if not better, education than the traditional system provides.
Yeah,
Definitely.
thank you very much, Philip, for sharing all these insights with us and with all the people that will see the video. I'm sure it's going to be super inspiring, both for educators and for parents that are considering different forms of growing and developing as a fully rounded human being. And good luck with the Summerhill Festival. I'm sure that the organization that goes into it, it's insane to make one of these things happen. We have organized some congresses ourselves before, and yeah, lots of people, lots of supplies. There's always tons of things going wrong, but it's also very fun. So yeah, I'm really jealous not to be not to be able to be there. So enjoy very much, and anyone that it's still can make it. Which were the dates? 5th to the 10th?
5th to 10th of August. Yes.
Right.
Fantastic. So thank you very much. And yeah,
thank you.
You keep spreading the world.
It was a pleasure.
How about this?
Bye
for now.
Bye bye. Have a good one.
You too.